inviting me to do the CPD. Just a caveat from my side, I'm a little sleep deprived. I have a 5.5-month-old baby and she was feeding through the night. So I'll do my best to deliver with clarity during this short time. In just under half an hour, I will talk about the design process. What does it mean to work with nature and disrupt the practice of maximization? Shift from human-centered to systemic understanding. How to reimagine the design process, asking what if questions, and understanding our impact as a species, as built environment professionals. And also share a few watch points and blind spots and practical first steps. So note that this is a very light touch to manage expectations. This is not a CPD about so-called solutions. Rather, it is an opportunity to create a field of inquiry around our current design process and how to shift from less bad sustainability to earth-centered regeneration. And just a really brief background, during my work in commercial practice and being exposed to climate activism and the plight of Indigenous peoples' rights in relation to land, I wanted to reframe my thinking and being on this planet, approaching a deeper understanding of our place in nature and as nature. So I started Terralupa firstly as a statement, and to date, continue to advocate for the built environment as a means to reconnect us to our living system and not simply view it as just the environment we live in, but or as a resource that we take from, but actually as a life force and a life source. So as built environment professionals, we have to re-examine our design process. And instead of giving a bunch of design project examples, I thought sharing with you a little bit about how to look at our design process firstly was more crucial to do for the CPD. Our design process also needs to consider how systems work, and more importantly, how we can work within them, whether they are social, structural, or environmental. So I began to ask, how would it be to put our planetary life-giving system at the center? When referring to life, it is capturing all aspects of life, from the cycles of water to the diversity of species that might inhabit our buildings, to the lives of the communities that our designs affect. What does this statement mean to you? What does it mean to work with nature as part of nature? And sometimes it can be really hard when we're stuck to our desks, responding to clients' design briefs. What if we moved from human-centered design to design that considered humans to be part of a larger living system, beyond being designers of a system? The human-centered approach perceives nature as a resource, calling it the environment, something that feels out there rather than this life here. We are deeply rooted in the thought that human ingenuity can outrun and outsmart anything, even climate change and ecosystem collapse. You might hear a baby in the background. Sorry about that. And we often forget that we are reliant on our living systems to survive. So in a way, the interventions we arrive at don't start from spreadsheets, sketches, or statistics. They start from our understanding of our place in the web of life. And I can be totally honest with you, this wasn't how I started my practice until one day it didn't feel right anymore. Taking the human off center, we begin to remember that we are part of a complex, interconnected system, and our function within it affects another, and vice versa. There is no real logic to this other than our actions have to be considered as part of the wider picture and beyond human experience. And just to put this into context, the oldest known living entity on this planet has the weight of 3 blue whales, covers an area of about 1,000 hectares, and is about 2,500 years old. Can any of you guess what it is? Put it in the chat. And if you guessed mushroom, that's right. In particular, it's a honey fungus mushroom. So if we think we're so clever, imagine what this mushroom knows. It's been around way longer than we have been. And to build on that further, in 2018, scientists estimated the weight of all life on Earth. This set of graphics is called the Tower of Life. All life on Earth shares the element of carbon. So the scientists use this to measure a snapshot of what life is composed of. There is an estimated 550 gigatons of life measured in carbon on our planet. As described by the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, humans make up less than 1%. So the text here might be a little bit small, but visually, the humans are this red rectangle right there at the bottom. And to put this into context, one of these visible blocks is composed of 2 million tons of carbon. One of these is equivalent to about 2 million cows. I won't go into the detail of what each color means, but if we reflect on this for just a minute, us humans make such a small amount of life on this planet. And if we use imagery, as we're all a kind of graphic people as well, and scale them, humans would be so small we wouldn't even see us on the screen. We would be less than 0.013% of the size of this tree on the slide. Yet our constant linear consumption of resources has a tangible impact on our planet. Many of you may disagree or agree, but our impact is disproportional. We are literally tipping the balance. The IPCC report of 2021 officially put us down at 1.1 degree at the time of reporting, 1.1 degrees centigrade, and that's in the temperature rise, planetary temperature rise. It's rising exponentially quicker than anticipated, and we are on a trajectory of overshooting the ideal temperature increase of 1.5 degrees centigrade. Now, there are a lot of initiatives to help mitigate and slow down this process, but what are we doing as built environment professionals, especially in the commercial area of our practice? I can't sit here and pretend that I'm not part of the problem, but I acknowledge that it is a systemic issue as well, and one that needs to be addressed collaboratively. Hence, the invitation to look at our design process. This slide is from when I did a similar talk in 2022, and not much has changed. In fact, we are already experiencing the climatic shift. The emphasis is first and foremost on planetary health in order to achieve climate resilient development. This quote is taken from that IPCC report. We must rethink our design process that reconnects us with the wider life system. The IPCC report shares that we must start real value. Adding a pound sign, if you are in the UK, actually devalues more intrinsic and intangible. Sorry, it devalues the more intrinsic and intangible. It perpetuates the unsustainable culture that everything exists in an economic exchange of supply and demand. Beyond using these sustainably, we can start more regenerative design decisions. I'll leave that slide there. I'll read it out loud as well for those who can't see it. Land and its biodiversity also represent essential intangible benefits to humans, such as cognitive and spiritual enrichment, sense of belonging, and aesthetic and recreational values. Valuing ecosystem services with monetary methods often overlooks these intangible services that shape societies, cultures, and quality of life, and the intrinsic value of biodiversity. The Earth's land area is finite. Using land resources sustainably is fundamental for human well-being. And I've been lecturing about and conducting workshops about this for the past 3 years. And we are asking the same question, going towards a solutions-focused approach when an inquiry-focused approach is more meaningful and adaptive. This is a slide adapted from another presentation from a few years ago. In the journey towards a different design process, there is an invitation to break some boundaries, to exercise our imagination, as inspired by Rob Hopkins' book, From What Is to What If. What if at the beginning of each design project, when we receive the brief, we start asking questions like this. What if all residential streets were play streets? What if bird song drowned out traffic noise? What if there were more trees than people? What if you could see the Milky Way from every garden or public park in an urban context? What if every park were connected to all other neighboring parks by at least one green, quiet way, suitable for walking, cycling, gardening, food growing? And you can start opening your imagination up to your own personal experiences and projects, asking what if questions. This is a simplified view of our current practice that practices as built environment professionals. And it is linear and keeps within the kind of red line boundary of our projects. The problematic theme here really is maximization. It's quite mechanistic and linear. It doesn't work like nature does. When we maximize, we break systems because of the inherent linear process that maximization creates, rather than the circular process of giving back. And over the course of past few years, I learned that there are few ways to approach processes that reflect how nature would create a design intervention. And one of the really simple examples that maybe across our projects would be the red line boundary. Now, it's there for a reason, obviously, but not often have I encountered a project that asks about softening the edges of this red line boundary, and that could mean physically and figuratively. Asking ourselves what kinds of systems are present within our sites and beyond, and how do you stitch back into the context at different levels, so not just community, not just the urban syntax, but also ecologically. And again, simplified version, but this is a reimagined design process that is based on asking the following questions. How do our designs support conditions for life to thrive? Are our interventions designed to stand the test of time or go back into the supply chain? The circular economy comes into the question here as well. How will my great-grandchildren experience this intervention? And is the intervention giving back more than it is taking? Instead of a linear process, we now have this kind of feedback loop. That means that we can interrogate the brief using a set of values or a set of ideas around the question of allowing, rather than allowing, supporting life to thrive. And then maybe working with the client to redesign that brief. Ruth Andrade of the Lush Foundation shared that their main driver for how they run the business and the foundation is that every action they choose should support life to thrive. If it is not, then they need to revisit decisions and shift their approach. At Terralupa, we support teams to develop their design processes. And one example was in co-creating a brief for a client. We used this image as a guide. The Spira's cyclical approach recognizes the effects of design choices as they spiral out, but they also have to be cyclical in nature at the same time. constantly feeding back design decisions. So we can get back to this if anyone wants to ask about that. And to understand our impact as design professionals, we can examine our own human history and connection to land. Not so long ago, we inhabited the earth in a way that was more intrinsically connected. Robin Wall Kimmerer, author of Braiding Sweetgrass and citizen of the Potawatomi Nation, reminded us that our relationship to land must be one of telling a new story. She coined the expression restoriation. I also add that we must take inspiration from our old stories to enhance our actions of restoration. You know, how many of you have been to Turkey or to the Périgord region of France and many other places in Eurasia? But these photos show ancient troglodyte communities, and they dwelled in caves across Europe and Eurasia. And in France in particular, these two photos here, these cave dwellings still exist. I actually know someone that's got a home there. And buildings were constructed from local sources, communities lived close together, food sources were local too. And of course, at the moment, we have a kind of very urban concentrated population. So what would it be like to apply these principles to today's context? Another invitation to create more awareness on our role as professionals is to reflect on our relationship to soil. It's not dirt, it's living. E.F. Schumacher, author of Small is Beautiful, understood human-nature relationship was the key to sustainable development, health, and well-being. When we start to see soil as a living organism and one that gives us life, we can begin to treat it with respect and reciprocity. Our design solutions often don't take into account the wider impact. For example, setting up intensive agriculture to feed populations. Probably not a built environment thing, but you get the picture. Or moving earth without much thought. So architects, engineers, architectural technologists, anyone in the built environment has been involved in moving soil from one place to another, one point in their careers. And we tend to ignore the interdependent relationships those different systems and their ecologies have with each other. A permaculture teacher once shared that digging into soil is akin to dropping a bomb on a block of flats. So much life stacked on top of each other with intricate relationships. It's just, and that's all destroyed in one motion. This third image here, some of you may have encountered it, is a regenerative project by Just Dig It. These crescent-shaped bounds dug by the Maasai tribes in Kenya slow down rainwater during the monsoon season, capture soil and minerals, and recreate lost habitat and food sources. How can these principles be scaled up or down to apply to our projects? I don't know how many of you are based in Bristol or the Southwest, but we've just experienced another huge downpour, and there were rivers of water flowing down the concrete. We have to start thinking about different design interventions that join up beyond the site boundaries. And not so long ago, communities in the Périgord region of France would include pigeon homes as part of their buildings, or even construct them separately. It wasn't just a gesture of care or consideration for the bird population. They also used the droppings to fertilize their gardens and cultivated land. Today, we specify these awful spikes to line our buildings. But you can see the birds adapt. They are nature. They are adaptive and resilient. So what are we doing trying to prevent them from creating homes when we can do something a lot more creative and integrate them? We have to move away from this practice of putting up barriers and borders to exclude, or hoarding resources that are meant to be shared with other living beings. Alexander von Humboldt, who traveled to Llanos and the Orinoco in South America in the early 1800s, wrote, "We observed with astonishment how many things are connected with the existence of a single plant. There's a sense of freedom in seeing everything. Infinity of space is reflected in ourselves." And this was decades before Darwin even came up with the theory of evolution. Here's a point of reflection again. What decisions am I making that exclude, rather than include, other species? Maybe the next few generations, human and more than human, and the health of elements of air and water, even land and rocks. And not all designs are thought through with time as a factor. How humans experience time is so different from how the mountain or bird experiences time. Certain cultures, like the Haudenosaunee of North America, examine the impact of their own decisions on the next 7 generations. And we're lucky if any of the projects we are part of think about the next 10, 15 years. We have to rethink the word regeneration to consider the next generations, to include other species and elements, and how our interventions affect them. These 3 images represent different relationships to water. The first one is a dam project in the Philippines that caused the water table downstream to dry up, collapsing land and indigenous peoples' farms and homes. And I saw this for myself in 2017. Water may be secure for residences in urbanized areas and farms in the vicinity, but the myopic view of creating a dam will have an impact in generations to come. The second image is the ancient Subak system of Bali, where the kingdoms of the island agreed on an autonomous and independent water system. Whether these kingdoms were at peace or at war, water is always available to sustain rice paddies and their ecosystems. It was run as a cooperative since the 9th century and spanned at least 20,000 hectares. The third image is Professor Kong Jianyu's approach to flood mitigation and biodiversity growth in urban areas. He calls them sponge cities. These integrate the shifting alive waterways and help create better urban water quality through natural filtration and attenuation. Looking at these 3 images through the lens of the next 7 generations, which ones do you think creates conditions for all life to thrive? Finally, here are a few practical first steps and watch points. The first does not involve designing, but looking within ourselves and engaging with our understanding of our place as part of nature. How can we expect to deliver Earth-centered design if we are in front of the screen most of the week? And here are some suggestions. I'll read a few. Stare at a raindrop on a leaf until you feel like it's staring back at you. Examine your food sources. Where do they come from? Who farmed them? How much water and sunlight are you consuming with every bite? Observation is the way you might approach design. The second is to examine language with integrity. We often unknowingly use language divisively. In choosing our words and how we communicate them, we begin to reframe and remember our place within the living systems that we are dependent upon. The Living Language Land Project of 2021, funded by the British Council, is a collection of 26 words from minority and endangered language holders that helps us to reflect our relationship to land and nature. How can we be more conscious of the words we choose? And how, in this more active choice, do they influence the outcomes of our work? And also to be aware whether we are implying power over something by using certain words. Here are a few examples. Using optimization versus maximization, or referring to the environment as a living system or biome, and maybe using the word stewardship rather than management. You can already begin to feel that the energy and intention shifts with a change of words. There are advantages to widening our design eyes by engaging with others and working with them collaboratively, rather than as a box tick exercise. Engage with people who work as ecologists, circular economy consultants, waste management experts, educators, and end users to inform the brief. This page shows an example of how we tested a design approach by engaging with an ecologist first before designing. The ecologist laid out the boundaries for us to work within, setting some design challenges. And it was quite a great creative experience. Don't have the time to go through this test project, but again, I'm happy to speak about it if you reach out to me later on. There are so many questions we could ask ourselves through the design process. The main thing is not to try to arrive at solutions, because ultimately these will have to adapt to a future context. Instead, we need to take a step back and observe. Engage with your imagination and ask questions that will challenge your design approach. Go slowly. It took just over 4.5 billion years to get to where we are. With our small slice of life and time, how are we to thrive alongside other species? And here are some examples of things we might be able to ask ourselves at every design decision. How is my design supporting the ecosystem? How will it look or be used? Or how will it go back to Earth? Or rather to the Earth in 10, 25, 150 years time, maybe even 300 years time? How is my design adaptable and how is it resilient? A mapping exercise can help to prioritize things that influence design decisions. We understand that not every approach is possible, and mapping them out can help determine ways forward. So picking a few of the difficult and high priority and more of the easy and high priority design decisions might help. Some practical actions like engaging ecologists early could help as well, and approaching every new site as an opportunity to improve conditions in order for nature to thrive. And when we design for nature to thrive, we ultimately do that for ourselves too. Client buy-in is only going to get easier as policy adapts to consider climate change and biodiversity, which we're already seeing now. Buckminster Fuller, in his book Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, recognized that we are potentially on the path to self-extinction and wondered whether our human intellect can become an inherent function to living regeneratively. And so I leave you with this thought. Earth-centered design ultimately comes from a place of connection and recognition of interdependence, an awareness of the immediate and long-term impact of human-led interventions. That was quite a lot, and thank you for paying attention. I shall pass back to Adam now. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Cara. Looks like you've got away without any questions at the moment, unless anybody in our audience has any questions that they would like to raise now. I know 2 people have asked for a copy of your slides, which I believe will be circulated after this. And as usual, the recording will be on our YouTube channel alongside all the other CPD in 43. Here's a question. Here we go. We have a question from Richard. What do you think of compressed earth blocks?
I think that they're great in the right context. In a soaking wet England, I'm not sure they're appropriate. It depends how they're made as well. They would, they work very well in Africa and some parts of Asia, where they've been using them for centuries. But again, here bricks are made here, and I think it's down to the process of them. If they're the kind of raw compressed earth blocks that you're referring to that are not engineered, then they could be problematic in this country. No, they work in Devon. Well, there you go. Maybe it is also probably about designing the roof properly and water capture around the site. So I'm sure there's this kind of wider ways of using the material that looks at the wider site as well, and not just the material in itself.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Yep. So our very grateful thanks to Cara for a fascinating and thought-provoking presentation. Plenty to think about there and to take on board in our designs and approaches to projects. And I've just seen
a few more questions.
Yes, Lee has asked, what size projects would it be worth employing an ecologist as part of the design process?
Well, personally, I feel like any size project would benefit from at least one conversation with an ecologist, especially if you know you're impacting on the land. A lot of the time, they're projects that are on a brownfield site or pre-use, urban context. You might think, oh, I don't have to speak to an ecologist because it's already been built on. But actually, now with the biodiversity net gain as part of policy, they could help you by going, okay, this is the current ecological footprint you've got in your site. We can increase it by adding X, Y, Z. And often they have more they can help kind of with our creativity, our creative thinking of solutions. I hate the word solutions, by the way, of interventions. Rather than us going, okay, let's just put a roof garden here and there or a plant box, where you can integrate them into the actual building envelope or the landscape itself. So it's worth having one conversation, and if you feel like it might be inspiring you to make different design decisions, then it's worth speaking to the client and going, I think we need to employ an ecologist now rather than a bit later in the project. And same goes for landscape architects. They're often employed a lot later in the design process. And we're seeing change now where landscape architects and ecologists are having to come in much earlier.
Thank you. And we have a member here who said, whilst I totally agree with all the sentiments, how have you managed to get buy-in from your clients?
Yeah, this is always a question I'm asked. And I have to be honest, it is really, really challenging. Until you start quoting policy, client buy-in is difficult. And as a design professional, it's like I step back and go, okay, can I speak to my clients about my child? Can I speak to my clients about their children and their grandchildren? How does that then start to change the conversation around the projects? And it's a really difficult thing to do. And it's such a slow process. I've been doing this for, like sharing these sentiments for the past few years, more verbally. And that question always comes up. And I throw it back at you. It's like, what are you prepared to do and say in front of your clients? What are you prepared to challenge them with? I don't have an answer to that specifically. And I feel like only policy can actually herald that forward. And I've already seen a change with the biodiversity net gain. Clients are asking for it a lot more now, whereas before the policy came in, I was talking about doing some interventions that would help greenify the projects, and they were like, no, I don't want to hear anything about it because of the cost. And now things have shifted. So yeah, it's about us lot really continuing this conversation.
And as a follow-on to that, they now say, are government clients becoming more willing to take these matters on board?
Yeah, I think so. The fact that policy and climate change and adaptation is there. Again, biodiversity net gain feels like it's putting pound signs to something that we should be doing anyway, but without that policy, we won't be doing it. So yeah, we unfortunately need the policy for us to act, which is really frustrating because we're experiencing this climate and ecological crisis right now. And it takes more of us to step up and go, I'm not ready to do the design unless these actions are made or these decisions are made. Yeah, it takes some courage from our point of view, from our perspective, I think. And I have to be honest, it's difficult to find projects that are aligned with values. So that's why I said to go slow. You know, you might not have a completely regenerative project at the end, but you might have added some bird boxes or places where bats can make their homes, do something that wouldn't have them otherwise. It could be really simple, small interventions.
Super. Well, that seems to be, oh no, it's dangerous for me to say that it'll be the last question. Right. So do you think there should be a ban on the external use of artificial grass for a number of reasons, or at the very least require planning permission, including replacing existing soft landscapes?
Yeah, I'm not, it's so difficult. You know, I'm not really for this society that kind of spoon feeds control. So banning something like that, obviously it would be great if it was banned. But I don't think that's necessarily the narrative we should be carrying. I think the narrative should shift to, like, instead of having artificial grass, why not do this because of certain positive outcomes that we can have from having natural grassland or wildflower meadows. And I think a lot of people just look at the maintenance cost of things, and therefore they put artificial grass or hard landscaping. And actually, when you look at the systemic effect of those two choices, given the amount of rain that fell today, you're just adding more to that kind of those temporary rivers that form on the streets and become flood somewhere in front of someone's home or on someone's street. So you have to kind of like zoom out and start telling different stories, and maybe that can help influence the people that want to put artificial grass into their sites. It's all about zooming out, I think.
Thank you. That nicely takes us through to almost 43 minutes, so that fulfills our brief. Thank you again. And the next CPD in 43 is on the 13th of November, presented by Mark Vaughan, FCIAT, and he'll be discussing the pros and cons when transitioning from 2D to 3D BIM environments. So be sure to sign up for that. And thank you for joining us, and enjoy the remainder of your Wednesday. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.